Coming to you live around the world from NOV's Studio 202. This is Inside Out Horizons. With your hosts, Lydia Mabry, Jeremy Grzywa, Cass Casey, and Shelby Dumaine. Now, let's start the show.
Welcome to Inside Out Horizons, a show where we talk with industry experts about all things new energy, energy transition, and oil and gas market, and new technologies coming into that space. Today, we have a great show for you about carbon capture. Before we get over to our guests, I want to send things over to Christian. He's going to tell you how you can get involved in today's show. Christian?
Thank you, Jeremy. If you guys have any questions for our two experts here today, be sure to drop us a comment down here below, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can before the end of the show. And if you want to watch previous episodes, be sure to go to nov.com/live, and you can go back and rewatch this episode as well as other ones.
All right. Thank you, Christian. So today with us, we have Nayeem Chowdhury and Brent Staley. They're both with the Carbon Capture Group at NOV. So, Nayeem, let's start with you. Can you just help for the audience describe what is carbon capture, if this is the first time someone's hearing the term?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having us. Always wanted to be part of this show. We're very happy to be here. To start with, let's break it down into carbon dioxide. We've all, in some way, shape, or form, heard of the term greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Today, globally, the world is emitting about 33 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year. The U.S. Takes about 6 gigatons of that portion. And to meet our climate goals, and these goals are set for us between now and 2050, the overarching goal is for us to decarbonize and reduce about 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalent emissions in the world. This creates an interesting challenge. The world has stepped up. A lot of countries are doing many things to allow for this 10 gigatons of decarbonization to happen between now and 2050. And out of that 10 gigatons, carbon capture is one significant part of it. The other parts of it include going into renewable energies, planting more trees, and creating more natural sinks for the CO2. Mm-hmm. But on the carbon capture aspect, just to kind of define, carbon capture is the process by which you take a stream of gas and extract the CO2 content from it and store it and or utilize it and let the rest of it go. So effectively, this can be done using pulling out carbon dioxide from atmospheric air, or it can be done by pulling CO2 from industrial sources like a cement plant, a steel plant, a power plant, or even an oil and gas refinery. Part of the whole carbon capture concept is what we're going to talk about today. The two different technologies that I mentioned, pulling it out of the atmosphere is known as direct air capture, and if you are capturing the carbon from a point source, it's called, as you may imagine, point source carbon capture. In addition to capturing the carbon, many of us have heard of the term CCUS. So the carbon capture part is the first two letters, CC. Then there's the U and the S, which is very important, and I think it's important for us to talk about. The U stands for utilization or conversion, and the S stands for storage or sequestration. Utilization of this carbon carbon dioxide that's being collected is extremely important, and these are technologies that effectively allow you to take the carbon dioxide that you are pulling out of the atmosphere or from a point source and converting into something useful, something that we can sell in a market. It could be building construction material. It could be other different materials that can be used in all sorts of fashions. And then there's the storage part. The storage part is effectively extremely important because that's where you take the carbon dioxide and you sequester it underground, or in a saline aquifer, or in a well that's been used in oil and gas activities in the past for any kind of hydrocarbon activity and is currently depleted. So altogether, that makes CCUS. It's a new and very exciting industry that we've jumped in, and NOV is very happy to be a big part of it. And we'll see where it goes. And hopefully today's conversation, we can jump into some of the topics that can kind of dive into why we do CCUS, how we do it, and what does the economics look like.
Fantastic. A great overview. A lot to unpack there. Let's start with technology. So Brent, for the audience here, both guests today are engineers and have a level of technical acumen here. So we'll start with Brent. Tell us a little bit about the technologies that are starting to emerge in the carbon capture space. Are they ready to be deployed today? Give us a little color on that.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Nayeem did a great job summarizing what carbon capture is overall. But when you're discussing carbon capture from the air or from an industrial source, there's different technologies that we use. First of all, this isn't a new technology. They've been doing carbon capture for the last 50 years on a natural gas processing plant, if you will. And they're using the carbon capture to sell into the food and beverage grade industry, or to use in enhanced oil production. But that technology, and the most mature and available technology that they've been using is what's called chemical absorption via an amine solvent. But there are other technologies that are in development and that have more or less different levels of maturity levels, such as membrane technology is one that's being explored and utilized currently. They also have solvent sorbent technologies and also cryogenic technologies. There's a variety of technologies, and there really isn't going to be a silver bullet, because each technology has its advantages and has its challenges as far as energy usage and footprint and modularity. And so really to solve this issue of emissions, it's going to take a mocktail of technologies to be able to really help further this initiative that we have to decarbonize the world.
So you mentioned, I think Nayeem, you mentioned cement plants earlier. Maybe you could tell us a little bit. I think a lot of us have heard about carbon capture from a plant, an electrical plant, taking a flue gas stream off a natural gas power plant and capturing that carbon. What would something like this look like in a cement or maybe a fertilizer, maybe a different use case?
So when we talk about flue gases, to define flue gas, you're effectively looking at the gases that are byproducts of combustion. So any kind of combustion that's created with the fuel source, a heat source, ends up releasing some form of carbon dioxide. Some of it, if it's incomplete, releases monoxides, and then you have other byproducts which are also GHGs, greenhouse gases, like the SOx and the NOx, which is sulfur and nitrogen-based oxides. If you're looking at any kind of kiln or any kind of heat source that is using heat to create a reaction, that has some carbon dioxide that's being pushed out and needs to be captured. So the difference between let's say a gas processing plant, where you may have to do some pre-combustion carbon capture, for a cement plant or a natural gas power plant, you would be doing more of a post-combustion carbon capture. And it's effectively similar technologies, but put in different parts of the process in order to get the maximum yield and also decarbonize the maximum amount as possible.
Very interesting.
And just to jump on that as well, so he talked about post-combustion versus pre-combustion. There are industrial processes like an ethanol plant that carbon dioxide is a byproduct. There isn't any combustion going on. And we're seeing a lot of activity in the ethanol industry of taking that carbon dioxide and treating it and conditioning it so that we can utilize it in some way or store it in a geological storage sink.
So, Brent, you mentioned earlier that this isn't a new suite of technology, that a lot of these technologies have been around for quite a while. What can you tell us about, gas processing and how the technologies that have been used out there in the industry today, how are they being adapted for carbon capture?
Fantastic question. So what's really great about industry and about the oil and gas industry is we have this rich experience in processing gases and processing oil, and we take in upstream oil and gas, we take natural gas as it comes out of a well and we treat it, we condition it, we dehydrate it, we remove carcinogens and SOx and NOx, and we also remove carbon dioxide. And so the processes for removing carbon dioxide using the same solvent or a similar process is very similar. There's a few differences and nuances to removing carbon dioxide from a post-combustion point source emission, such as you've got oxygen present, the pressure is atmospheric pressure. Without getting too much into the weeds technically there, the processes are 95% very, very similar. Mm-hmm. Similar equipment, similar expertise is required to design the system to do that.
Okay. So with that in mind, it seems like the technologies there, the technologies are known, should be relatively low risk implementing something like this on a point source emitter. So what are the challenges that we're seeing facing adoption?
So when you mentioned risk, that's an interesting topic, because although the technology today exists to take carbon dioxide out of a flue stream, and technically that can be put under a low risk category, there's a fairly high risk when it comes to the financial aspect of decarbonizing using carbon capture. It's just expensive. When you take when you look at a ton of carbon dioxide that's being captured, there are industries today that are looking at their bottom line, looking at all the operations that they have to do, and they have margin expectations from their shareholders that say that without decarbonizing, we are making this particular margin. It gets difficult when these same industries are now being asked to decarbonize without the right incentives in place or without the ability to actually make money from decarbonizing. So when you take a step back and you look at the economics behind it and their go, no go in terms of financial decisions, it ends up being a fairly high risk. And it's one of those impediments to large worldwide or large scale carbon capture technologies being implemented in lots of industries.
So you mentioned their incentives, and that word is kind of triggering to some people because it elicits government. What is the government doing?
Sure does, yeah.
So, obviously we're talking about a global issue, but let's stick to the U.S. What is the role of government? Let's say the U.S. and the EU. What's the role of government in this industry?
So you said globally before that. So globally speaking, government is playing a really important role in accelerating the deployment of carbon capture. And in the way that they do that, in most internationally where we're seeing most of the activity in carbon capture, there's tax burdens and penalties that are incentivizing companies to implement carbon capture. In the U.S., there are some incentives. There's what we call the 45Q tax credit. So for every ton of carbon dioxide that you capture, the government will give you a credit or a tax credit for that ton that you capture, depending on what you do with the carbon dioxide. If you store it in the ground and permanently, then they'll give you a little bit higher credit. Right now it's around $50 a ton. And if you utilize it in some way or convert it, as Nayeem referenced, or use it in enhanced oil recovery, it's around $35 a ton. In California, they do have the low carbon fuel standard, which is a tax credit exchange system. So the economics are much more friendly in California, and we're seeing the activity uptick because of those incentives. But basically, in the U.S., what we're being asked to do is we're being asked to decarbonize industry as a social plea. And as Naeem pointed out, the economics don't work, and so social pleas don't pay the bills. And so there isn't enough incentives right now to see a massive adoption of carbon capture technology in the U.S. Recently, as you might have heard, it's been very publicized. There's some recent legislation that's been proposed just here in the beginning of August of this year that has this legislation has some really interesting provisions that will really inject a lot of energy and activity into the carbon capture industry. Just to highlight a few of the provisions that are in this bill that will really make a difference. One is they're going to increase the amount of tax credit for each carbon that each ton of carbon that you capture. So where it was at $50, if you store it, it's going up to $85. If you're going to utilize it in some way or use it for enhanced oil recovery, it's going to $60. They're also they've prolonged or pushed out the construction commencement date to 2033, which as you're tackling these projects, they do take years to get off the ground. They take years if a company wants to decide today that they want to do carbon capture, there has to be some techno-economic evaluation of what it would be to capture carbon on their site. And then you have a front-end engineering design study that to provide a firm or firm-based quote and engineering design and detailed engineering design on what this looks like at the plant. And those take more than a year. And so you've got a couple of years to before construction starts. And so for companies that are looking at this now, that commencement date, that makes a big difference to help projects go forward. And then there's also they reduce the thresholds for carbon that's required to capture, roughly really low, 18,000 for a power generating unit and lower for other industry sources. And then they've made it to where it's a design requirement. So you're required to design the system to capture 75% of the carbon dioxide on that specific point source, not for the facility as a whole. Which there are trace emissions and fugitive emissions at any site that are difficult to capture. This will really help us tackle the main problems and the main sources of emission. And so this bill is doing, and then of course don't forget the direct pay feature in the bill. That provision will really help companies that aren't tax strapped from the get-go to get these projects off. This will help infuse some cash up front to get these projects off the ground. So I think it's really exciting. We're really going to see a major increase in activity in carbon capture due to the provisions in the bill if it goes forward. There's been 3 independent research groups that have taken a look at this, and they've projected or predicted that if the bill does go through and it is enacted, then they project that we'll see roughly a 40% decrease in carbon dioxide emissions in the U.S., which really is getting us. It's a great positive. It's great progress in what we're trying to accomplish in the decarbonization movement.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and just to put a context on that 40%, what I've read is 40% based on 2005 emissions levels in the U.S.
Correct. Peak emission levels in the U.S. Correct.
So you talk a lot about economics and profitability. Naeem, I know you're also into the finance of this. How do you think this bill is going to have an effect on the profitability, the go, no-go discussions?
Yeah, I know I started off the discussion by saying carbon capture is very expensive. I stand by it. But like a lot of expensive initiatives out there, the economics are what really justifies the go, no-go, right? I think this bill is a really good step in the right direction. This bill, and looking at all the different aspects that and all the things that it's going to do to change the economics, you almost have to take a step back and redo your financial models and redo your thought process on what constitutes a profitable project. I think there's going to be a lot of projects that we've talked about over the last year that are all of a sudden going to be profitable. So that's great news, and I think those are going to get greenlit very quickly. I also think that because of the higher level of government incentive, the more ease of doing business via those direct credits that are going to happen, you're going to see a lot more financial institutions step up and say, hey, if you're trying to decarbonize, I would like to fund you. Direct pay, in the past, when it was all a tax rebate, it's not a whole lot of incentive for financial institutions to jump in and try and help out because it's a little bit more complicated. When you talk about direct pay or effectively cash for decarbonization, this will, I think, trigger and definitely stimulate the financial institutions to jump up and say, here, we're going to help you do these projects. There are still some barriers in the way. We talked about risk earlier. We have to de-risk a couple of more things. So de-risking the financial aspect means that there needs to be a lot of research still that needs to be done to lower the cost of carbon capture. And that's happening as we speak. There are new technologies out there that are not necessarily that 40-year-old technology or 50-year-old technology that Brent talked about, but they're newer, novel methodologies that people are talking about and are being proven in a smaller scale today to be half the cost of traditional amine technology, but can provide the same amount of yield. So there's a lot of exciting progress happening in the world. The DOE actually has a big part of this conversation as well. The DOE allows for grants, and the number of grants that are going to come out now are definitely going to be of higher value, and they're going to allow for these newer technologies to grow at an accelerated path. These new technologies, and we use the term TRL in the industry, which is technology readiness level. The goal of new technologies coming into the industry is to go from a low TRL level to a high TRL level, and at one point it becomes a commercially available technology. The DOE and all the work that they're doing in this space is going to allow for these technologies to come online quicker. They're going to allow for these technologies to get greenlit on more projects because of DOE funding, because of financial institutions, and because at the end of the day, the value stream for carbon capture has now been motivated in an accelerated path to be able to make these projects happen. So overall, I think it's good news for the carbon capture movement. We're going to see some projects come online pretty quickly. We're going to see a lot more push on newer technologies as well.
That's great. Yeah, I think for me, what's interesting in the bill outside the carbon capture space, there's a lot of provisions included for technologies in the hydrogen industry, for the nuclear industry, for consumers who want to make their home more economically friendly, for people who want to dive into the EV market, or you have a lot of incumbent companies in the commercial space that are going to be hard to displace. Sure. And so this could potentially incentivize startups and a lot of newer technologies to be adopted. And so I think across the spectrum, a bill like this just helps give a little nudge and a little momentum to the energy transition movement. Yeah.
Now, Jeremy, you've always been on one side of these interviews and interviewing a lot of people, but you and I have worked together for a while. You've been, you yourself do a lot of work in the energy transition space. I'd like to hear your opinion. Yes, this bill sounds great. Lots more money to be pushed out, but what do you see for energy transition technologies like nuclear or solar? What do you see the future of that, and do you see this bill really helping us figure out or carve a way into more renewables using the funding?
I think it absolutely helps. It's similar to the credits that you're seeing available in the carbon capture space. There's 700 pages to this document, so I have not read the entire thing, but the Cliff Notes, it's intriguing. There's new tax credits for other renewable technologies. Small nuclear is also mentioned, modular nuclear technology. So, I'm of the opinion that anything that helps bring these technologies to market faster, to help tackle that, 40% reduction we're aiming for in 2030, is going to be beneficial. So I know we're running up on time, so I want to leave time for questions from the audience.
Sure.
I think we have some good engagement there. So, Christian, why don't you give us a question from the audience?
Yeah, for sure. Talking about startups, you just talked about it. Someone asked, what role do startups play in the CCUS market?
Yeah, I could tend to. So they play a very important role in energy transition and new technologies. The startups are key. If you think about traditional ways of generating power, traditional ways of energy being generated, you think about all the different technologies that we use, like natural gas power plants or coal power plants, and we've got some technologies that are coming up and coming, and also very well established, like wind and solar. You also have all these new conversations happening with hydrogen. You got CCUS. There are a lot of ideas that don't necessarily start in a big corporation. There are ideas that start in garages. There are ideas that start in universities. There are a lot more ideas that come from out there than are actually created in a large organization. And today, there are a lot of pathways for these companies and these startups to actually grow. So there's incubators and accelerators growing up everywhere, and Houston's about to become a big hub for that. There's pitch competitions. If you're part of the SPE, and I know a lot of the viewers for this show are probably SPE members. SPE has a very, very good energy startup competition called the ATCE Startup Village. And that happens every year. And the whole point of having these startup competitions is to allow for these startups and their ideas to come out. And there are lots of pathways by which you get all kinds of exposure to mentoring on how to take a startup from an idea to a business, and then how to actually accelerate your idea or your business into something that has enough cash to get the job done. So these are neat ideas and great question. I think startups are key. I think everyone in a large organization, although there's lots of money in R&D, I think the real ideas, the real cool ideas and novel ideas are going to come from startups in the next 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, it's interesting to think. Look, the oil and gas industry has been around for decades, and it's evolved a lot from where we started, with the Drake well. Let's give that as an example. And we continue to evolve. So a lot of these startups are also looking into technologies for traditional oil and gas operations, and how do we decarbonize this industry. So I think the startup space is very interesting. There's probably $1 billion company that's operating out of a garage today that will be a household name, 10, 20 years from now. So, Christian, do we have another question?
Yeah, we got two more here. The first of which is, what is NOV doing in the carbon capture space?
Fantastic question. And Nayeem talked about startups. NOV is not a startup. So we've been doing, we've been really looking 5 or 6 years ago. We looked at internally what is NOV capable of? What are our core competencies that exist now that we can use to repurpose, reposition, to provide some meaningful solutions in this space. And removing carbon dioxide from upstream oil and gas was a very natural transition for us. And so we have that group that does that, and they're doing it for carbon capture on a post-combustion environment as well. So right now we're involved in tackling pre-feed concept studies and pre-feed studies and providing high-level estimates of key equipment that we supply and our process design as well. And I think one thing that I think hasn't been mentioned yet today that's really key. It's a key word in carbon capture. It's collaboration, and it's so important for carbon capture to be enabled. And the way is you have startups that have new technology. You have a company like NOV that has a tremendous track record in commercialization, and we're teaming up with companies like that. And then you have EPCs, and you have midstream companies that are deployed to transport the CO2. And if you look at the entire value chain from cradle to grave of capturing carbon dioxide from the point source, conditioning it and processing it, and then deploying it into a pipeline to store into a storage well. You hold up all the things that NOV does, all of our product portfolio, and it's quite impressive that there really isn't any parts of that path that we don't have a product or a service that can help that part of the value chain. Just to name a few, so we are the largest glass reinforced epoxy composite pipe manufacturer in the world, which has been utilized for the last 50 years for handling carbon dioxide. We also, for our offshore, we're very well known for our injection equipment, our flexible pipes, and our loading systems for loading CO2 from an FPSO to be able to put it onto a platform to inject it. And we manufacture pumps and there's valves and a lot of different things that NOV does. We have a great, our Tuboscope group is great pipe coating for coating services to handle carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is corrosive by nature, especially when there's water involved in carbon dioxide. You can form carbonic acid, but we're very good at doing all of those things, and so we're very active in answering the call to decarbonize through carbon capture, and it's great. It's a great time to be at NOV. It's a great time to be in this industry.
That's fantastic. That's great. Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah. Lastly, Brent, you mentioned earlier about storage of the CO2. Are there specific regions in the world that are better at storing than others?
Absolutely. So right now there really are just a few different geological formations that are ideal for storing CO2. You have saline aquifers, and then you have depleted oil or gas wells or salt dome. And in the U.S., we actually have, by the order magnitude of multiples, we have more storage capacity in the United States than anywhere else in the world. Basalt is another great formation for storing CO2. And there's a lot of work right now that's being done to map out in the U.S. and globally where are those sinks that are ideal for storing CO2. But yeah, lots of great storage capabilities in the United States for storing CO2.
Great. Okay, we are out of time for today. So first, I want to say thank you to both of you for sharing your insights today. I think it was a very interesting conversation. And for all of the audience who was with us today, thank you for participating, submitting your questions. If you'd like to see past episodes of the show, please go to nov.com/live, and we'll see you on the next show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jeremy.